welcome.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear respected Coordinator of Policy and Area Studies Research Unit, PASRU, at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, Dr. Mio Alif bin Mio Azlan, our honorable guest speaker, Dr. Daniel bin Muhammad Yusof, respected political science lecturer, participants, ladies and gentlemen. I warmly welcome you all to the webinar series on religions and politics in the Muslim world. I'm Saidatunisa Zainuddin, and today I'll be the moderator for the webinar titled A Dystopian Scenario of Contemporary Islamic Political Thought Implication for Malaysian Nation Building. We have with us today an esteemed speaker, Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusof, who will present his analysis of contemporary Islamic political thought and its political dystopian impacts on Malaysian nation building. Dr. Daniel is an associate professor of political science at International Islamic University of Malaysia, as well as research fellow at National Higher Education Research Institute at USM. He has published extensively in various journals on an array of topics, including preventing and countering violence extremism, PCVE, comparative politics and religion, and national building. He is also actively involved in a wide range of research projects and consultancy with the government of Malaysia, the private sector, as well as other international organizations. In addition to that, we have a distinguished discussant, Assistant Professor Dr. Mio Alif bin Mio Azlan, who will provide commentary and share the reflection of the ideas of the main speaker. Dr. Mio is also a political science lecturer and coordinator of PASRU at International Islamic University of Malaysia. He brings expertise on a comparative study of conflict, counterinsurgency, decolonization in Southeast Asia, political violence, and terrorism. We thank and appreciate the presence of Dr. Daniel and Dr. Mio Alif to be a part of today's webinar series. In today's complex socio-political climate, understanding the trends in political Islam and their ramification is crucial. This webinar will provide an insightful academic perspective into some concerning dystopian scenario that could unfold vis-a-vis contemporary Islamic political thought and Malaysian nation building. We look forward a constructive discussion that will enrich our comprehensive understanding of this significant topic. And finally, let me share a few informations about our webinar. Our speaker, Dr. Daniel, will present his idea for roughly 35 minutes, and the discussant, Dr. Mu'alif, will share his observation for 10 minutes, and then we will open for question and answer session. Please feel free to submit your question through the chat box. And before we begin, I kindly request all the participants to turn on their video camera if possible, because seeing one another faces really helps to facilitate more engaging discussions and allow the speaker to better gauge reaction and responses from the audience. We greatly appreciate your cooperation and participation. It's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusof to give his talk. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me well enough.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to Basru. Thank you to the Department of Political Science. Thank you to Dr. Zaki as well as Dr. Myo for inviting me to speak at this, I think, increasingly significant forum or platform to discuss issues pertaining to governance in the Muslim world. When I was invited to speak on this topic, I know I'm given 35 minutes, so maybe I'll take 40, just a few more minutes. Dr. Mio agreed earlier. I was thinking about a topic that I haven't spoken of, or an issue that I haven't thought of for some time, I haven't reflected upon. So I ended up with this particular topic. It's by no means a finished topic. It's something which is perhaps in development if I ever continue to develop it. Yeah, but it does have a certain semblance of, I think, existential crisis. Yeah, and I will explain that as I go along. So allow me to share the slides now. I hope you can see them in a bit. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
All right, okay. So a dystopian scenario for contemporary Islamic political thought, implications for nation building. As you can see from the topic itself, what I'm trying to suggest is that we are living in a dystopia. Yeah. The dystopian condition that I feel imposed upon us, especially now, is made apparent as a result of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. But apart from that, of course, we have to look into our own country, the nation building experience. And you find that there are, of course, issues that indicate to a certain extent disagreement, contestations about Islam, its role in nation building, and beyond the nation state itself, as global citizens in an ometic context, if you like. Yeah. So if you open the news or read the social media over the past week or so, you will come across a lot of discussion about some of these matters that I've posted onto the opening page of the presentation. So you have, for example, the contestation of Islamic discourse between the conservatives and the so-called progressives in the country. IAIS was accused of being a liberal platform, and to such an extent that they had to come up with a statement debating on the matter. And then, of course, we had the film Pulang, which, of course, bypassed the filtering mechanism of Lembaga Perfilman and was released online. And of course, it did discuss, to a certain extent, its own dystopian fantasy. Yeah, I haven't seen the movie yet, of course, but I will probably see, I think, Abang Adik first before I see Pulang. But nevertheless, it touches on sensitive issues, yeah, the 3R issues. In this case, of course, it touches on racial segregation or the fantasy of racial segregation in Malaysia. Then we had, of course, the imposition of a non-Malay or non-Muslim onto Islamic institutions in the country, in this case, MKI. Yeah. And of course, he apologized, but nevertheless, damage was done to a certain degree in relation to reinforcing the Malay perception of DAP. Yeah. So these are things that we actually experience. I think on a weekly basis, there's always new topics and whatnot that makes you, I think, reflect upon the state of the country and how and where we are going in terms of nation building. Okay, now this is the outline of my presentation. I mentioned that there is a personal context to this. Why there is a personal context to this? Because I've been in this sector for a few decades now. I think a few decades and a half, actually. So when I say a personal context, in the 1980s, I was beholden to the idealism as well as the radicalness of the idea of Islamization. Yeah. And I was opened up to the idea of joining IIUM because of a speech that was made on national TV by Almarhum Prof. Kamal Hassan. Yeah. And also at the same time, as far as politics was concerned, there was also the Palestinian issue. Yeah. I saw for the first time Yasser Arafat speaking at the UN. And lo and behold, now it's 2023. We are still talking about the same issue, right? The same drivers that have pushed me into studying politics, into being concerned, a concerned citizen of the country as well as the wider Muslim Ummah, so to speak. The issues that we thought was going to be resolved as a result of resurgence that occurred in Malaysia as well as in other parts of the world that was supposed to inspire us have transpired to no avail to that extent. We have achieved nothing to that degree. Yeah. So I did feel lost. Yeah. When the October 7th attacks happened and then the subsequent bombing and the unfolding genocide, there is a question mark. Well, what are we doing? Where are we going from here? I recognize October 7th and the genocide itself as a milestone, a significant event for the Muslim world, as well as probably a reinvigoration of Islamic political thought about how we are going to think and act upon certain principles and action that can be done. But nevertheless, the sentiment that I write these ideas down basically for today is out of I think a context of despair, a personal despair. Yeah. The outline then, of course, goes to look at Islam and modern political thought, what has unfolded over the past 250 years or so. Yeah. I would also try to introduce a new concept, not a new concept in other fields perhaps, but in maybe political science is not used as much. Memoryscape. Yeah, so I'll be talking about memoryscape and how I find it to be a useful concept to be understood in terms of the milestones of Muslim or Islamic history as far as Islamic political thought is concerned. And then from there, I will try to explain a bit about contemporary Islamic political thought contextualized in the nation state, a memoryscape of Malaysia, as a more, I think, concentrated discussion. After that, I will talk about the N-word, and it's not the word that you think, okay? But the word is something which has gone unnoticed in its normalization in the social sciences, in the media, and in, I think, everyday conversations as well. And I will talk about the origins of this word and why I think it's such a dangerous, I think, concept to be normalized. So the N-word and implications for Malaysian nation building and the challenge of basically social media 2.0, interactive social media, that is to say, yeah, the digital scape, as well as the idea of expanding sovereignty into the digital space, and how this impacts on political epistemology, and what it means for the nation state and issues of security and public order. So I will discuss that if we have time. And then at the end of it, I will talk about uh, the foundation of political philosophy, which tends to emphasize on dissent. Yeah? And how, as far as the political scientist in me is concerned, we also have to play, for example, the role of public intellectuals, as well as people who try to mediate and reconcile extreme positions within society, as far as our consultancy is in relation to the government or the state. Yeah. So I do feel sometimes that there are contradictions in terms of what I think or feel as a political philosopher as compared to the role of a consultant. But nevertheless, it makes me appreciate the process of nation building and how we have to accept as well as allow spaces of discourse for people we do not necessarily agree with. Yeah, I will talk about a national plan which is going to be launched in February, inshallah, which is the Malaysia um, National Action Plan for Prevention and Countering Violent Extremism, 2024 to 2027, if I'm not mistaken, actually, and my own concerns on or about state hegemony. Okay. All right. So Islam and modern political thought, these are just some, I think, definitions that we tend to operationalize as far as discussions are concerned. Yeah. If you look at political thought, it has been in the context of decoloniality and post-colonialism, been around for quite some time. There have been evolution in the discourse. And we've come to a point where there are certain terms that are popularized today in various discourses, academically and in publications. We tend to talk about decoloniality. There has been a normalization of decoloniality in relation to the colonial legacy and how this incorporates responses from colonies and affected communities through their cultural identity, as well as, in this case, Islamic and philosophies. Yeah. So decoloniality refers to a de-link from Eurocentric knowledge hierarchies and ways of being in the world in order to enable other forms of existence. In other ways, what it's trying to look at is the perspective of development from the indigenous perspective, yeah, not from the Western knowledge hierarchies. And then I always go back to Hamid Inayat for some reason when it comes to understanding the timeline, yeah, of modern Islamic political thought. The primacy of politics in modern Islam, the inherent link between Islam as a comprehensive scheme for ordering human life and politics as an indispensable instrument to secure universal compliance with that scheme. So political thought, Islamic political thought in this case, in relation to colonialism, decolonization, post-colonialism, is something that has been around as a discourse for 250 years or so. Also in Islamic political thought, there is this understanding that it's the collective duties of Muslims, of which the most important are enjoining the good and forbidding evil, and the defense of the Muslim territory is something of a necessity as well. There's also the discussion as to who should rule. Yeah. Why should we obey the rulers? Now, this is the hub of politics as far as Islamic political thought is concerned, of which the impulse to do so would be much more powerful when Muslims are subjugated, as large numbers of them have been during the last 4 centuries, yeah, by alien rulers or those associated with them. Now, more so, in an increasingly dystopian world, as I have spoken of at the introduction, we have continued to add milestones in Muslim history, in modern Muslim history, especially that which pertains to the fall of the caliphates and the subsequent colonial activities of Western powers, yeah, and how this has added to the Muslim political history as memoryscapes, which have set the terms of discourse, the response, for example, of the modernist Muslim thinkers to the nation state, and so on. And we have been reactive as a result of these milestones. And I mentioned, of course, the dystopia, yeah, the dystopian world that we are living in, as we continue to helplessly look at the various media networks and also the private channels, yeah, individual journalists or reporters on Telegram and so on. If you really want to see unbiased or even more uncensored reporting on the ongoing genocide. Yeah. Now, what is a memoryscape? Yeah, as I mentioned, the memoryscape is a word that is often used in relation to history, in relation to museums and memorials, if you like. Yeah, um, the ones that you are probably familiar with is that if you go to a guided tour in a museum, for example, or if you go to a castle somewhere in Europe and you buy for the microphones and for the headphones to be put on, and you will experience the sight and sounds of the medieval age, for example, and um, that becomes a kind of a full-blown experience of the past, if you like. And in this case, yeah, the memoryscape is a physical landscape of a particular place that serves as a site of memory, usually a visual representation. It can be of a political figure or documents in films, statues, or even street art, graffiti, for example, which shape the collective memory of the nation and contribute to the ongoing challenges of nation building. Memory, mobility, and spatial transformation are unstable over time. When you go to a certain place, the idea of the immediate history is there of that particular generation. But as it moves on in time, certain things might be forgotten, certain things might be preserved. There might be a national history. There might be a revisionist history to it as well. Yeah. So the memory beyond the memorial. These are, for example, pictures that I took when I was in Banda Aceh, I think a few months ago. So one which is, I think, Masjid Baitur Rahim, where we spoke to a survivor of the tsunami. And of course, the memoryscape, unless they record it, of course, the idea, the experience would be removed from the immediate generation that experienced the tsunami. And our perception of it would be perhaps recorded in history or otherwise. So we also have the Tsunami Museum, which also makes use of memoryscape approaches in ways to discuss. But nevertheless, there is always the tendency for it to be reinterpreted. For example, by changing governments because of the sensitivity of a particular historical monument or occurrence, and so on and so forth. And so I think you get my idea where I'm going with this. And I'm sorry to bring this as an example, but I think when we check the IIUM library page on Facebook, I think like a few days ago, there's a information on I think collection of archive material for the founding of IIUM, some of the founding documents, the pictures and whatnot. And somebody made an interesting comment. It's kind of a political comment, but nevertheless, I think it captures the interplay between power and history. Yeah, the politics of official and revisionist history about which prime minister, the current prime minister or the former prime minister, was more instrumental in relation to the founding of IIUM, and whether there was a revisionist history that occurred after his removal in 1998, 1999. And what had transpired ever since in relation to the official history of the university. So those kind of things. But these are the political, I think, issue that I associate with a memoryscape. It differs. Yeah, the memory of the event may differ according to different groups, different factions, and of course, different experiences. the whole reason that I actually was attracted to the idea of a memoryscape was because of a particular paper from UKM, Hilmi et al. 2013, which actually discussed the Malayan Union as a monument, as an inscription in history, and how, to a certain extent, it facilitated the spectrum of Malaysian politics ever since. Yeah. It's a short paper, I think about 6 or 7 pages. It's not that long. It's not an accomplished paper to say the least, but nevertheless, there's certain elements about it which makes it especially interesting. Yeah, in the way that it makes use of certain ideas that was never used before in relation to understanding timelines of history and its impact in society. Yeah, and because of this idea of memoryscape, I began to rethink about some of the timelines and how interpretations pertaining to the milestones, whether it's national or civilizational or Muslim history on a larger scale, has changed over time, or whether some significant events have actually even slipped into oblivion. Yeah. So these are 5 periods of Muslim history vis-a-vis colonialism and neo-imperialism that I tend to work with when I discuss with my students about contemporary political history and some of the milestone historical and, of course, political events. Yeah. So, for example, 1699 to 1798, in relation to the Treaty of Karlowitz, the first moment when the Ottoman lost their territories, they stopped expanding. In 1798, I believe, is the years that led to the short conquest of Egypt by Napoleon. Yeah. And then, of course, 1798 to 1922, European dominations and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the end of the Caliphate, which incidentally, this is the 100th year. Yeah. And other elements pertaining to it, the French and British mandates, and basically the carving of the modern map of the Middle East. 1922 to 1962, decolonization and origins of Islamism, Turkey Secular Republic, and independence en masse, 1945 to around 1960s. Yeah? And of course, nationalism, nation state, and nation building. Then 1962 to 2001, pertaining to Islamic resurgence, yeah, the Iranian Revolution, and of course, among others, the issue of Palestine as well, including, for example, other events like the Bosnian Genocide of 92 to 1995. And then 2001 to present, 9/11 and the war on terror, Islamophobia, ongoing Islamophobia, Daesh or the ISIS Caliphate, 2013 to 2019, and the Palestinian Genocide of 2023. So all of these are milestones, monuments in the memoryscape, which probably means different things to different people. Yeah. Because if you talk about the rise of Arab nationalism, and you were teaching in a class, for example, of Turkish students as well as Arab students, you will get opposite response to the entire historical context of the discussion. You might actually even watch a fight break out between the students. Yeah, that's how passionate they are about the history of that particular time. So these are memoryscapes that can be utilized to examine our own perception about our own sense of history, whether they remain relevant to us or whether they have slipped into oblivion, like the concept of the caliphate, which I argue has lost its imperative, its impetus over the past, I think, number of decades or so. We used to always talk about the idea of the caliphate, but it has become, to a certain extent, corrupted because of how it was misrepresented by ISIS and so on. So what will happen? Are we going to reappropriate the concept again? Will it be something which we will try to use to reinvigorate Islamic political thought going into the future? And these are the kind of things that I'm talking about, yeah, as we go from one generation to the next. And then, of course, by virtue of accepting the nation state. Now, I'm a patriotic guy, okay? But nevertheless, I do believe that the nation state is actually the final uh, or the ultimate legacy of colonialism. I'll get to that at the end as to why I think it is problematic to a degree. But nevertheless, as a result of movement towards independence and then the formation of our uh, respective constitutions and then nation states and independent nation building afterwards. We went through a process, a very deliberate and focused process of nation building, which involved a development of our own political spectrum. And of course, you will find that some of the ideas, because of nation building that has occurred in the country, and you tend to look at history from the position of the present to the past, you will probably find the ideas of API, for example, or Melayu Raya and Amat Bersetamam as being extremely radical to the point of being treasonous. Yeah? But it tells you again the bit where you are socialized, propagandized to a certain extent to accept a certain idea about the landscape that you are in, which is not necessarily helpful in the larger scheme of things. Okay. So the memoryscape of Malaysian political thought, aside from the Malayan Union, you can probably look at all of these figures, for example, ideas, visions of Islam, and even alternative visions of democracy from the left and whatnot, and see how they have matured and how they have not changed to a certain extent as well as we go along into our sixth decade of independence. So the whole idea of contesting Islam, I think I'll try to not focus so much on this. Yeah, but basically it's again about the internal dynamics of contesting political Islam in the country, how it has spun off into different factions and different representations and different visions of Islam by subsequent governments and so on. And of course, to look at religion per se without looking at other dynamics of identity politics is also not to be done, actually. If you really want to understand Malaysia, of course, you have to look at the interplay between ethnicity and religion. And this is, of course, essentially a discussion on the state of Malaysian politics today in relation to the Green Wave and how this has been debunked by a number of writers and scholars as well. And why, for example, the focus on the Green Wave itself indicates a level of, I think, ideology at play, yeah, in terms of certain writers about what they think about Malay and Islamic politics or Muslim politics. And of course, the counter position would be how would you evaluate the voting pattern of the Chinese community and so on? Why is it not written as, for example, for lack of a better word, the yellow wave and whatnot? Yeah. So you have to put into consideration the ethnicity element as a driver in Malaysian politics. And another thing that I wanted to actually emphasize here was the 3R, yeah, race, religion, and politics. Race, religion, and royalty. Sorry. Why for the past couple of months have been voices or statements made to try and limit our discussion of the matter. But when you look at Malaysian political thought, there has never been a moment that we have not spoken about 3R. Yeah. I think what we really need to talk about is the ethics of discourse, yeah, agreeing or disagreeing about 3R matters in the country. So here are various cartoons, and I think from the cartoon themselves, if you look at Zuna, as well as this is a cartoon from 1939 or 1929, I'm not really sure. But it tells you again about the prevalence of ethnic and religious politics in the country. Now, the N word that I wanted to speak about is actually narrative. Narrative is actually such a hated word during the time of postmodernism and post-structuralism in, I think, the 1990s and the first decade of the 21st century, if you like. And for some reason, postmodernism died, but the word narrative didn't. For me, the greatest indicator that we are actually living in a postmodern society is the use of the word narrative. Yeah. And of course, this was spoken of by Lyotard, the incredulity of meta-narratives, how people reject a universal, I think, explanation of reality or truth. They live within their own little narratives, the world that they want to occupy. Yeah. And some people actually have noticed this. Yeah. The irritating use of the word narrative that spills over into our everyday conversation. Everything's a narrative. Even the demise of Manchester United is a narrative, which for me is a good thing, by the way. Okay. Um, and then we go to the use of narrative in political discourse and how dangerous it is, because narratives, okay, in postmodernism is not supposed to be reconciled. You can't mediate or reconcile narratives because it is supposed to be, there's a term for it, which I can't remember for the life of me at the moment. Yeah, but narrative is something which actually talks about the irreconcilability of different viewpoints. Yeah. And I remember, I think about 3 or 4 months ago, somebody, a scholar, on a nighttime show in on Malaysian TV was talking about the 3 stories about Malaysia. Yeah, we have the Malay perspective of Malaysia, the non-Malay perspective of Malaysia, and the perspective of East Malaysians on Malaysia. 3 distinct and separate narratives about what the country is and where it is going. Yeah. And beyond that as well, we also have this contextualization of Islam within the boundaries of the nation state, which to a certain extent is good as far as governance is concerned, but also problematic as far as I think the Ummah is. But that's, I think, a separate discussion. The idea of narrative and the irreconcilability or the incommensurability, yeah, of narratives is also emphasized as a result of technology. So we have, for example, the internet, and this is what I refer to as the digital scape. Yeah. If you look at the latest numbers in Malaysia, 30.8 million in 2022, about 92% of the addressable demographics of the country are users of social media. That tells you a lot about this, the digital scape as an ecosystem for political discourse, for good or worse. And in the context of social media 2.0, we have epistemological issues take center stage. I think over the past 5, 6, 7 years, we've been talking about fake news, truth decay, echo chambers, post-truth, alternative facts, and so on. Yeah. It bothers me when I look at BBC, for example, and you have to watch a BBC Verified. There's something weird about this. Yeah. The fact that you can't really believe what you're reading or you're watching, that you have to verify it. And again, the whole idea of verification is itself problematic and political. If you're talking about verification from the IDF, then of course, it really doesn't have any value. Yeah. Even the picture of the poster of this talk today was doctored, actually. Because if you look at my face, it's superimposed on a suit that I'm not wearing. I don't have that tie, by the way. But it's just a joke that I'm making with Dr. Mio and Dr. Zaki. But it tells you a lot about the visuals as well as the projection of ideas and stories and narratives, if you like. Yeah. So this is especially problematic in a time when we have a decentered discourse or media. And as a result, each one of us is a resource to that extent. And we are only emphasizing on reinforcing differences instead of trying to bridge the gaps. So it contributes to disagreements, and an irreconcilable clash of political outlooks and polarization. Yeah, and this is very difficult for nation building. Why? Because if you remember, in the 1990s, the government and the state was talking about, the internet as a blessed thing in terms of the global village, in terms of communication and whatnot. People were talking about not regulating it. But now we are talking about digital sovereignty. Yeah, we are practicing the digital sovereignty because of the need in terms of security and public order. Yeah. So digital sovereignty has become something which is, I think, commonplace. And it adds to the problem of nation building going into the future because of these decentered voices and autonomous voices, by the way. Yeah. And of course, you can see at various examples of attempts at digital sovereignty, whether it's the Great Firewall of China or Gaia X of the European Union. Yeah. Because they want to protect their automotive industries from US espionage into their data. Yeah. So the internet started as what was supposed to be a post-Westphalian construct, but gradually it became a site of dystopia to a certain extent, as far as attempts by governments are made in relation to monitoring, yeah, and so on. So the intersection between regime type, social media content, privacy, consumption, international politics. So what is the nexus between national security and social media? It will be determined by various, I think, factors, including political culture. Yeah. And if you look at certain examples of, I think, globally concerning events like the cultural genocide of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the user is lost in a sea of synthetic content. It reinforces a sense of mistrust in injustice, but also a lack of, I think, confidence about the information that you're getting. Until today, I'm not sure what happened in Xinjiang. I think you can't really tell for sure what's the reality of uh, what's occurred on the ground. And this is, of course, um, reinforced, yeah, by the dissented narrative of the media and cyberspace. So dissented media and contending narratives, and we found that again, it depends on your position, which frame that you would take pertaining to a particular news item. Yeah. So this is about an example pertaining to the exit from Afghanistan of the US troops. Yeah. So whether you take the Al Jazeera frame or whether you take the official frame of the US government and so on, it can be misleading and problematic in trying to, I think, understand the whole picture on the ground. Yeah. Sometimes a picture can tell the story in a better way. 20-year story of Afghanistan. And of course, now we are looking into an inverted narrative, if you like, yeah, of Israel as victim to perpetrator of violence, of death, and genocide. Yeah. So there are elements which makes it an extremely powerful tool in a horizontal power sense, as Foucault would say, the relational power. But nevertheless, it also makes it extremely problematic for a government to try and manage, yeah, the perception of the people pertaining to any news item or global events in this case. I myself, as I mentioned, feel that there is a dilemma of state hegemony, whether to allow for certain discourses to occur or whether to block, for example, certain discussions of 3R. So being somebody who tries to bridge different positions from civil society organizations as well as the security agencies, you try to find a space, yeah, that you can perhaps nurture through policies, through plans that facilitates healthy discourse and monitoring rather than state hegemonic discourse over a particular issue. And this is what we try to do. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that it will be a success. There's always a trust deficit between especially security agencies and civil society groups. And this can only be bridged by having a healthy democratic space. But nevertheless, that balance always remains. Yeah. And as a result, we try to look into the whole context of security and public order from desecuritization to securitization. So we try to stretch the space, if you like, to ensure that there is room for problematic radical views, as long as it is not translatable into action or terror activity. There is a level of tolerance pertaining to it. So this will be launched in February next month. So security and public order and the democratic space and nurturing nation building, if you like. Yeah. So going back to the previous slide, yeah, the idea of strengthening nation building without I think, an overwhelming sense of propaganda at the same time. Yeah. So this is what we're trying to look out for as far as the space of political discourse is concerned, pertaining to religion, royalty, and race as well. So I talk about nation building being in dystopia because if you look at the experience of nation building, it comes at the expense of neighbors, of I think civilizational collaborators, if you like, Muslims from other countries and other nation states. So I was thinking about this particular idea, that we are building the nation state on the ruins of our civilization. That's the sentiment, that's the feeling that I get when I look at what's happened in the Gulf states pertaining to their inability to react. Yeah. So the Gaza genocide or the Palestinian genocide as a monument in Muslim memoryscape, where it scopes the failure of the international order and Muslim countries and their limited response because of territorial sovereignty and strategic interests. But nevertheless, this may reinvigorate contemporary IPT, but what kind of political thought is another thing that we can perhaps be concerned about. Yeah. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, an epoch of dissented media and contending narratives, intra-Muslim factionalism, security and order in nation state that are, by construct, a post-colonial legacy. Yeah. And we are trying to decolonize state institutions from being interpreted as a secular constitution, as a secular entity, organization, and organ of government and whatnot. At the end of the day, I feel that we are in a period of liminality. If you look at the previous timeline of Muslim history, something is about to happen. It's pregnant. It's paused, but there's a pregnancy in the stillness of it. But you do feel that you are in a kind of darkness. But whether it's the darkness of the tomb or whether it's the darkness of the womb is open to deliberation. But having said that, as I mentioned earlier, I feel that all that I'm talking about right now is basically a result of my inclusion in political science as a field from the moment I started to be interested in IIUM and going through different milestone events of Islamic resurgence and onto the present scenario, which has not changed anything to that extent. So I feel I have to end on an extremely negative note here so that Dr. Mio can try to lighten up the day. Thank you very much. Let me just stop this.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Daniel, for the insightful presentation. And I believe that you have highlighted several interesting topics such as the challenges of political epistemology and the digital landscape. And you also mentioned the idea of strengthening nation building and many more. I think you have added rich dimension to this such complex topic. And I'd like now to invite our discussant, Dr. Mio Alif, to share his perspective and commentary. We welcome your learned counterpoint, additions, and as well as questions you may have for Dr. Daniel. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Assalamualaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Again, thank you everyone for your presence. Thank you, Sister Nisa, for your introduction. I think the right thing to do now is to keep my portion short and then give way to the rest. I see Dr. Ramzi, Dato is there, Prof. Moa is here, Dr. Zahid, I saw earlier, and Dr. Rabia, Dr. Zaki, and so on. So I think it's best if I sort of do it quickly. I'm quite surprised with the presentation. I thought the N word would be nasi lemak because I haven't had my dinner. But very interesting points made. I'll say maybe three very quickly. One, I think the department and Pashru in particular, of course, myself and you and everyone here, actually, what I think the mood in the room is that we want to nurture more robust discourse on things. So hopefully this is the case from this point on. And then when you were talking about, I think my role is sort of like a broker for the moment. Like I'm shuttling between the audience and then helping them a bit and then sort of contributing. I think when you speak about narratives, that brings a really good sort of general point as well. Is it the case that maybe we have to keep on, we should keep on taking a conscious attempt to continuously try and read against the grain, to borrow sort of like a phrase, right? Because it sounds like the circumstances now feels like we should start thinking of being more conscious about looking at things or considering things somewhat against the grain. Also because, like you said, there's a lot of prefiguring occurring. Whether it be the sources of information or even how how archival information is presented to us, or even to the simplest thing as how a lecturer sort of speaks to a group of students, right? Because there's a kind of packaging that's occurring. I think that the third sort of a bit of an extension, I was thinking, it was in my head and I was thinking about it. When you mentioned memory, I mean, perhaps it also brings out maybe a deeper point vis-a-vis memory, right? Because it's history memory and it's memory history and vice versa. Because I think the discussion on memory being in itself a kind of reliable source should be discussed as well. Like, how do we, when we proceed, are we proceeding with, lessons that we presume to be parts of, we know that our memories can fail us oftentimes. That's
what they say, Dr. Min, what they say about memory? Memory becomes legend and then becomes mythology.
yeah.
Totally unreliable.
Honestly, I struggle to remember sometimes like what happens last week. And again, to your point of needing more, perhaps more physical monuments and things like this. Again, this one brings up another question: is Malaysia short of physical monuments? Are we reaching a singularity between human memory and what we consider to be digital memory? Because how do we remember what happened in February, right? I'm scrolling through my iPhone. I see. In February, I did this, so and so and so and so. It's good because it's documented, but is it the same thing? Like, again, deeper questions over what memory is in general. And then, of course, I think the last one would be along the lines of, are we brave enough to even think about, whether it's fictional or real, alternate history? Yeah, fictional alternate history feels safe, but actually, fictional alternate history, sometimes captures parts of reality as well. Are we brave enough to actually have an alternate history or multiple sort of alternatives that people can sort of rally around? So I think I'll give away here. That's my sort of contribution to the discussion. I'm sure there's more questions. Maybe you can weigh in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add to what you said. If we just want to bring a number of different timelines in, then we can just refer to this. We have to act on something. This is the 40th year of IUM, or it was the 40th year last year actually, right? And it's also the 100th year of the Caliphate, the end of the Caliphate, this year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are, I think, significant. I think signposts of memory that we have to work on in relation to our in the understanding of Islam.
I think we can take questions. You should, Nisa. Please.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Miale, for the additional comments, idea, and for pushing us to think deeper on several aspects on this topic. So now we have time to open the discussions to questions from all the participants. And as a reminder, please feel free to submit your questions at the chat box. And maybe you have any question even for Dr. Daniel or Dr. Miale. Okay, we have one question here from Sister Rosaini. So the question is, could Dr. Daniel elaborate on the launching of the core values my PCBE in Feb and how it's contributing to resolving the issue in nation building?
Okay,
This is
thank
the
you
first question.
for the question, Rosaini. Okay, that's a question I can actually answer. So we will be launching, inshallah, in February. I haven't received the dates yet. But definitely, as far as the core values of my PCBE, if you look at the first value, it is on strengthening and reinforcing nation building. What we're looking at is basically to revitalize, certain elements of nation building activities to be more youth engaged and youth led to that extent. And what we've actually done is we had a workshop 2 weeks ago, and we had different stakeholders from various ministries and whatnot. And the idea is that with the launch of the MyPCBE, we'll be having a secretariat of sorts, which will try to ensure that the activities of various ministries do not overlap. And the best case scenario is that they can collaborate and try to optimize on resources. So among others is that we're trying to look at issues such as digital literacy, as well as counter narratives against extremist ideas, workshops that can be conducted by Siasat under Wisma Putra, and so on and so forth. But going into the future, the idea is that MyPCBE would be a platform where we can identify, suit different ministries and agencies from civil society, from corporate universities, and so on, to be more participatory in the way that we approach nation building. So this might, of course, in the future involve looking at, I think, more long-term elements such as curriculum and whatnot. But ultimately, the initial idea of MyPCBE is that we have a central element that can be an oversight into all activities pertaining to nation building in relation to preventing extremism. Okay, thank you. No. Okay, I see the question. No, none yet, but it will try to create a platform for focus groups and so on that may lead to, I think, new discussions pertaining to laws and whatnot.
Okay, I think Dr. Ramzi has a question.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel, for your presentation. It was very, very interesting. By the way, because we are in political science, so we are going to deal with the problems and issues forever. That's this is our destiny, actually.
Yes.
So based on your presentation, there are topics also I'm trying to understand it, for example, concerning my area of studies, which is the Middle East and the development and so on and so forth. And I think what you have said concerning memories, we can say that the starting point is after the colonial powers, means the starting point is the idea of nation states. It's when we got our independence in the Muslim world. Why? Because a nation state is something new for us. We used to live under Khilafah, we used to live under empires, and after colonialism, we find ourselves as a nation state. But the concept itself, as you said, is problematic. Why? Because we didn't discuss it and we didn't initiate any discussions from the beginning. And we ran away from this concept, which is the nation state, and its impact and its relationship with our history. We didn't know how to deal with this new concept and new reality, which is the nation state. And the memories that you were talking about, actually, the memories is the accumulation of realities. And as more as we are escaping these realities, we don't discuss nation state. We don't discuss how to build a nation. We don't discuss, for example, the primitive unification, which is the starting point, means based on what are we going to build our states. We need to discuss this. As more as we escape it, it became itself as the memories for us. And this accumulation, it became more and more dangerous for the future. And you see, because we escape it 3 or 4 decades after the independence, I'm talking here about 90s. So in 90s, as you said, we start seeing, for example, the Islamic, the extremism actually in our countries. It's because of this. We didn't discuss it. We didn't deal with it. So those memories for us is a reality, can become a dangerous reality for the others that they can do it, that they are going to use it against the nations, as we have seen with, as I said, the Islamic groups and so on and so forth. Is really a very continuous discussions, and as you said, we need to open these discussions for a real now, if we want to build our nations, and if we want to deal with this concept of nation states. Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel.
Thank you, Dr. Ramli. I think that's a comment. Thank you.
Okay, in the chat box, I think there is 2 questions from the participant.
Okay, first I look at Rosaini on capacity building in conflict management. I think it's an ongoing thing that we are doing actually. There's a number of research units, one which is doing something on mediation, training, as well as consultancy on mediation and peace building. Okay. And then on our part as well, on my part, we do work with other agencies in relation to capacity building in conflict management. So there are a number of entities in IIUM that are engaged in research, as well as those who are offering services on conflict management and peace building. And then the other question is, what do you think the Muslim world should do to rescue the oppressed Palestine from an academic point of view? None. I mean, I can offer anything at the moment because of the, as I mentioned, that existential crisis that I have run to stand still. Yeah, I've started doing political science or being interested in political science in the 80s as a high school student, and then now. But it's come to no avail to that extent. The issue has not been resolved. I used to imagine, fantasize that it was being resolved, but it's not. It's gotten worse. And you do have not really a personal sense of guilt, but you know what? There should be a collective guilt as to why it has failed thus far. On an ideational level, the previous milestones in our memoryscape has failed to reinvigorate us towards a solution. Now that there are new milestones with the genocide and so on, what can we expect from the current generation of students as well as going into the future in relation to this? Will it be those that are highly radical and things like that? So these are the things that concern me, because if I was 17 now, I would have a very negative view of the nation state in the Muslim world, because of these global issues pertaining to Palestinians and so on. We see that it has brought nothing of, I think, religious or spiritual value. There's a lot of national visions in terms of strategic plans for development and so on, but at the expense of each other, and unfortunately in competition with each other in a negative way as well. So I fear about the kind of ideas and groups that will rise out from this because of the failure of us in addressing the situation at hand.
I think we have 2 more questions, and then maybe we can.
One question on 3R. I think I made a short point. I couldn't go into elaboration, but my thinking is that I think with my students as well in our class on Malaysian political thought is that 3R is something that is inescapable from Malaysian political discourse. It's something that should be encouraged. because it never stopped since pre-independence all the way through independence, through the setting of the constitution and the nation building process and so on, and modernization of the nation state is a constant in Malaysian politics. So the way that we manage the discourse is more important than saying, no, these are sensitive issues and whatnot. Of course, there should be rules of conduct and so on. So this is also part of what I believe, when you have such things as Undi 18 and so on, it should be reinvigorated, the idea of expanding this electorate with more mature, I think, tools that they can use to facilitate healthy discourse and make use of that democratic space that is available to us. The state can manage with the help of, I think, other stakeholders. Yeah. So the idea is that it's not just about the state alone. The state is working together with different entities. And I think this is a viewpoint that cultivates, to a certain extent, the ideas that come in with the ushering of mature democracy in Malaysia after 2018. Yeah, we can do that. There's a lot of openness about discussing with different groups.
Okay, Datuk Marzuki raised their hand. Okay.
And I have one question, of Daniel. But I agree with you that basically what we are facing now in terms of the competing narratives or the contestation of the competing narratives is like an unfinished business that started earlier.
Right.
Even before independence, like that you rightly said, that we have this kind of right, left, radical, conservative, Islamic state, secular state. This is not something new that has been there for a very long time. Now, the thing is, now I want to get your view from your experience or your involvement in my PCVE. Because in the past, this has become a justification for the government to use repressive means. Yeah, ISA, and then the Sedition Act, you see, in order to maintain political stability and to make sure that there will this contestations of these competing narratives in the public sphere will not lead to chaos, yeah, something like that. So they use this as a justification to maintain and also to use all those repressive means and laws. But if you can see the development since the past, say, 10 or 15 years, there's been a wider space for public debates and discourse in this country. There is a certain level of openness. Even ISA has been abolished, and then there were pressure or demand for legal reform. I mean, that those they call it draconian laws, to be abolished, and so on and so forth. Now the rise of TikTok, FB, and whatnot, and that will further encourage public discourse on these sensitive issues. Previously, they call it very sensitive issues, and now like 3Rs, for example. In a way that we celebrate this openness, we celebrate this the ability or the space given to the citizens, to discuss all these issues. But at the same time, we know that if it is not well managed, then it will lead to disunity and not nation building, but ruining the nation. So we're talking about nation building, but I mean, so in your experience and involvement in my PCVE, do you have any, say, for example, threshold, for example, a threshold or the tipping point where this discourse or in the open public space will turn into a security concern, for example, and whether whether it will justify, the state, or the government to use some sort of repression, in order to manage the situation. So has it been discussed? I'm sure you work with people in Ministry of Home Affairs, if you ask them, probably they want what you call it, ISA to come back,
Yeah.
or they want Sedition Act to be
Mm.
retained. And the discourse out there, they want these laws to be abolished. How do you strike the balance, Dr. Dania?
Well, when I empathize with them, I want the ISA back as well. But nevertheless, speaking from a consultant point of view in the development of the plan, we did have discussions with different groups, even research organizations, boutique research outfits that specialize on developing instruments and tools in managing hate speech or monitoring hate speech. So we have to, I think, look into that, developing online tools that is able to capture the nuances of Malaysian political discourse pertaining to the 3R issues. Once we have, I think, a database and we can make sense of the database about what is okay, what is not, we are able to set up some parameters, at least on social media. And basically like what they are doing in reverse to us against talking about Palestine. But in our case, we are trying to limit the problematic discussion that may occur from discussing 3R topics. So it can be done. And the whole idea of the National Action Plan is to encourage capacity building along these lines. And hopefully there'll be a lot more, I think, activities as well as research opportunities to look and I think institutionalize some of these in relation to the respective ministries. So it can be done. But again, having said that, I'm also a political philosopher by training, and my point of view is that you have to allow for these radical viewpoints to emerge and to give them space. I think even in the town hall and the focus group discussions that we had, we actually called all of the or most of the not problematic but controversial groups to give their input in the development of the plan. So it's something that we will continue to do. And we will continue to give space in relation to bettering, I think, the mechanisms of fleshing out as well as implementing some of the collaborative ideas. We had a workshop a few weeks ago, as I mentioned earlier. There is already a kind of promise for Siasat to collaborate with Ministry of Unity, for example, Japanin, which has, strangely enough, never happened before. There was never a working, I think, context between these two agencies. And as a result of the steps that we are taking towards the launching of the plan, we are encouraging more of these discussions and so on. So basically to stop working in silos, because there's a lot of good being done, but because of the sense of ownership and the territoriality of some ministries, it can make it a problem. But I do believe that Malaysians, as we can see from the history of our discourse on 3R, as radical as they were then all the way until now, I think you can say that there've always been the possibility of it exploding into something bigger. But you can say that we have been able to manage it. And I think with a lot more inclusive activities, we will be able to do better challenging these new, I think, variables, especially in relation to social media, how to deal with them and so on. Thank you, Ratu.
All right. Thank you so much for the great questions. Any more questions coming in? No. I think Sister Razani made a comment that leadership of nation, the way nation building is heading. Yeah. All right. So thanks a lot for the great questions. I think we had some great discussions toward the end of this webinar series. And as a conclude for today engaging discussion, I want to thank our esteemed speaker, Dr. Daniel, our discussant, Dr. Mio Alif, and all of the attendees for making this webinar a thoughtful discussion of a complex topic. Before we log off, I invite our speakers and all the participants to open your camera and join me on a screen for a group photograph to commemorate this event. Please open your camera. Okay, Hanif, let us know, okay?
Okay, on three, 1, 2.
No. Okay. Done.
All right. Thank you so much. I want also to remind everyone that our next webinar series will be held on January 15 on the topic of Islam and democracy, key terms and recent debate. On behalf of Pasro, I thank you once again for joining us today. Please stay connected online and we hope to continue engaging with you at the future events. Goodbye and take care. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Dr.
Salam.
Thank you.